to go ahead and call this work session to order. It's about budget calendar and budget principles and the 5-year forecast. So I will turn this over to Mr. Luckett.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are here for our first budget work session for FY 2021, and everybody's really excited about that. So we're going to be talking about our 5-year forecast primarily tonight, and as well as going over some dates with you all. So I'll go ahead and turn that over to Harpreet, and she'll get our presentation started.
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council members. So this is, as Ryan said, this is the first budget work session as part of our fiscal year 2021 budget process. And budget staff and the departments look forward to working with all of you during this process. So we'll quickly go over the budget policies and principles like every year. And then we'll take a look at the economic outlook for the Atlanta metro area. We'll discuss the 5-year forecast for the general fund and some of the other major funds. And then we'll quickly go over some of the major dates that we have during this particular budget process, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So starting off with the policies and principles. So like every year, we like to tell you all about this. And the city of Roswell has a reserve policy for its general fund and its enterprise funds. And for the general fund, we maintain a reserve of greater than or equal to 3 months of operating expenditures. In the enterprise funds, we are required to maintain a reserve of 10% of the unrestricted fund balance from the prior fiscal year. And we are also required to maintain a quick ratio of at least 1. Now, the quick ratio is an indicator of the fund's short-term liquidity position and measures the fund's ability to meet its short-term obligations with its most liquid assets. And then the third policy that we adhere to when it comes to the enterprise funds is that revenues have to be 101% of the projected expenses. And if the fund has an outstanding debt, then in that case, it shall be 105% of the projected expenses. And when it comes to the principles, so the general fund has to be structurally balanced, which means the current year operating expenditures have to be funded with the current year revenues. And the reserves above policy are used only for one-time expenses. So the next couple of slides will provide some information on the economic outlook for the Atlanta, Sandy Springs, and Roswell area. So the information presented here is mainly obtained from Moody's, but some of the highlights are also taken from Dr. Jeff Humphreys, who is the director of the Selig Center for Economic Growth at the University of Georgia. So looking at some of the major highlights, so Georgia's economy will continue to expand, but at a slower rate. GDP growth is expected to slow to 1% in 2020. And then manufacturing and the agriculture sectors will be the ones most affected by the slowdown. The professional, scientific, and technical services sectors will continue to expand. Population will continue to grow, and that will help with the housing market, which is expected to stay strong. And you will notice that in your packets, we've also included a report from Moody's that's been provided to you all. And these are some of the major economic indicators that have been put together by Moody's for the Atlanta, Sandy Springs, and Roswell metro area. And as you will see, most of them are positive. And then it's only the total employment and the personal income which are forecasted to drop in 2021. Before I get into the 5-year forecast of the general fund, I would like to share a few points on what financial forecasting is and why we do it. So financial forecasting is a process of projecting revenues and expenditures over a long-term period using assumptions about economic conditions, future spending scenarios, and other salient variables. And forecasts can be used to provide insight into future financial capacity so that strategies can be developed to achieve long-term financial sustainability. And other than that, it is also considered a best practice by GFOA and is viewed favorably by the rating agencies. So we'll start with the general fund. in the general fund, we made some assumptions when it comes to both revenues and expenditures. And among the revenues, the assumptions that we made mainly for property tax. So the projection for FY 2021 is based on the 2019 digest value with estimates for exemptions, appeals, and growth, which have been taken into account. And the millage rate has been kept constant at the current approved 4.955 mils throughout the forecast period. Moving on to the property tax revenue. So this particular chart here gives you a snapshot of our gross digest and also the total property tax revenue for the city of Roswell. It gives you a history and it also gives you a forecast for the 5 years. So, and the property tax revenue number is the blue line and the red columns are your gross digest. And the property tax revenue includes revenues from the real property, which is the major chunk here. It also includes revenues from personal property, TAVT, the motor vehicle tax, taxes from public utilities, and a few other smaller items. And as you all know, the floating exemption, homestead exemption was applied in 2019, and that's been taken into account. So as per that, starting in 2021, we have grown the property tax revenues just by the CPI. So the residential property is grown by the CPI, whereas the commercial property, that is grown by 7% in 2021 and 2022, and then 5% in the outer years. For the sales tax, this is a snapshot again. It gives you a history of how the revenues have been coming in. We've provided an estimate for FY 2020 and also a projection for the 5 years. So as you will see, we have grown the sales tax revenue by 3% in 2021 and 2% in the outer years. The sales tax has been growing steadily the last few years, and the revenues have been coming in well over our projections. The average growth in revenue over the past 3 years has been around 4%. And for FY 2020, we estimate the revenues to come in at a little over 3% over the prior year. When it comes to the other revenues and expenditures, most of the other revenues are grown based on the rate of inflation. The operating expenses, we have assumed a continuation of the current level of service, and we've included all of the maintenance capital in here in the forecast based on what was approved as part of the FY 2020 CIP. And one-time capital expenses are not included in the forecast. And you will notice that we've also, in our revenues and expenses, we've also included the employee compensation, the 3% increase each year, and we've also included an increase in the health benefit costs. The items that are not included in the general fund forecast is any adjustments related to the comp and class study that is underway right now. Anything that's come out of the organizational assessment, the recommendations made there, that's not been included in the general fund forecast. Any potential initiatives resulting from the strategic plan process have not been included either. And the impact of the potential capital projects included in future years of the CIP is not shown either in this forecast. So this chart here gives you a summary of the revenues and the operating expenditures over the 5-year period that we are showing. So you have the 2020 budget and the 2020 estimate. So the 2020 we estimate to come in about 5.1 million over what we had budgeted in terms of our revenues. And then you see the projection outwards from 2021 up until 2025. There are a couple of years where our expenses are projected to be higher than the revenues that we anticipate coming in. And this chart here gives you a picture of our ending fund balance, which is the shaded portion in blue. And then you have the fund balance above reserve, which is shown by the orange line. And then the reserve by policy, the 25% that we maintain, which is shown by the red line. So as you will see, we have a a very stable fund balance that we will be maintaining throughout the forecast period based on the assumptions that have been made. Moving on to the enterprise funds, we'll start with the water fund here. So the assumptions that have been made for the water fund, the revenues are grown by 4% in each of the years in the forecast period, except for FY 2025, because the 4% is what has been currently approved by Mayor and Council, and that expires in 2024, July 1 of 2024. And then for 2025, we've just assumed an increase in the rate of 2.5%, which has to be approved by Mayor and Council. It's not approved, but we've just put it in there for the forecast. And then the forecast also includes revenues from meter sales and capacity fees and any increase in sales from new growth and development that we anticipate. And then the operating expenses have been grown by half of CPI. And all other assumptions that have been made in terms of inflation, the employee compensation, the health benefits is all constant. It's the same as what we assumed for the general fund. And then we've also taken into account the Fulton County sewer rate increase, which is already approved, and that's up until 2023. We've shown what has been approved by Fulton County, the 5% increase. That has also been taken into account in this forecast. So this chart here depicts how the fund is going to perform during the forecast period based on the assumptions on the previous slide. The FY 2020 estimated capital expenses, you will notice, are higher than the FY 2020 approved, and that's because that includes the mid-year adjustments that were made, that were approved, and then it also includes your carry forwards and rollovers and encumbrances from the prior fiscal year. So that's why that number is higher. And also I'd like to mention here that the capital expenses include $400,000 in each of the years in the forecast period for the water line replacement projects. Next we have the solid waste fund. So here again, most of the assumptions are the same as for the general fund and the water fund when it comes to inflation, the employee compensation, and the health benefits. We've also taken into account the increase in the residential rate and the commercial rate, which is approved by Mayor and Council up until FY 2024 at the 3%. And of course, the forecast also includes revenues from new growth and development. Operating expenses, again, are grown by half of CPI. And also the forecast includes the estimated cost for the new transfer station, which we have assumed will be funded through a combination of using the fund balance, the current fund balance, and financing as well, which would be a loan from GFA. And that the breakdown of that is what we assumed in the forecast is like $2 million. So the transfer station, the estimated cost is $3.1 million. And we've assumed that we'll use $2 million out of the fund balance and $1.1 million will be the financing portion. So this is the chart that kind of gives you a picture of what that fund will look like based on the assumptions. And the sharp drop that you see, the black line is your ending unrestricted fund balance. So the sharp drop that you see is because of that, the transfer station cost that we've taken into account in the forecast. Moving on to the stormwater fund, here again the forecast assumptions, most of them are the same except for the rate increase, which is approved by Mayor and Council at the 2.5% up until FY 2024. And we've also assumed a 2.5% increase in FY 2025, even though that is not yet approved by Mayor and Council. That will require your approval. And then, of course, the operating expenses are grown by half of CPI for this particular fund as well. And this is how the stormwater fund is expected to perform based on the assumptions that have been made. And you will notice here that the ending unrestricted fund balance continues to drop as we move to the outer years up until FY 2025. And that's mainly because there is not much growth in revenue in this particular fund. And of course, and also there is the capital expense of the stormwater projects, which is constant at the $1 million that is projected out. I'll now hand it over to Ryan. Ryan will do the other part of the presentation when it comes to the other funds.
Thanks, Harpreet. The next part of the presentation, we wanted to go over some of our special revenue funds. The first one being our Hotel Motel Fund. So just to give you a little bit of background, as you might remember, effective last July, our Hotel Motel tax rate increased from 6% to 8%, and that was an approval that we got from the state legislature this time last year. Based on that new tax rate, we have three components of our Hotel Motel tax. That includes our tourism, conventions, and trade shows portion, which makes up 43.75%. That's the portion of our Hotel Motel tax that is dedicated to our Convention and Visitors Bureau for tourism promotion. We also have our tourism product development that makes up 18.75% of the total tax that we collect. That portion is dedicated for the creation or expansion of physical attractions that increase tourism. And then finally, 37.5% of our hotel motel revenues that we collect are unrestricted and can be used for any general fund purpose. And so one of the assumptions that we included in our general fund forecast was that these unrestricted funds would continue to be transferred to our general fund. The next slide shows you our revenues, forecasted revenues for our Hotel Motel Fund, and we've broken them down into the three components there at the bottom. So you can see that we are anticipating that our revenues will continue to grow over the forecast period, primarily because of the new hotels that will be opening over the next 2 to 3 years. Two of the hotels we're anticipating full year revenues from in FY21. Another hotel opening completely for FY 2022, and then another hotel opening in FY 2023 for that full fiscal year. The next slide shows you our expenditures for the Hotel Motel Fund. So just as a bit of a reminder, you can see that for our FY 2020 approved budget, the TCT portion of our revenue, that's the part dedicated to the CVB, that $656,000 was allocated to the CVB. The council also approved allocating an additional $143,000 to the CVB from our unrestricted portion to give them a total allocation of $800,000. $250,000 was available from the TPD, or the Tourism Product Development portion, and that was an approved capital project in FY 2020 for the River Parks master plan implementation. And then we had $400,000 that we were able to transfer to support general fund operations. So moving forward, as you can see, we are anticipating, just as a placeholder, but this will be up for discussion during the budget process, of course, in FY 2021, that we would continue to fund the CVB at their current level of $800,000, which would require a smaller amount of our contribution from our unrestricted revenues. But then moving into 2022 and beyond, we're anticipating that they would be able to live off of their TCT revenues solely. But as you can see, revenue from the TPD portion as well as our unrestricted portion continue to grow. That could go towards, as I mentioned before, the TPD portion, items like a visitor center. It could go towards rec and parks, facilities. There's a whole list, and we discussed that back when we brought that before council about a year ago. The next fund we wanted to discuss was our E911 Fund. So here, again, we made the same assumptions when it came to inflationary rate, employee compensation, health benefits. Just as a reminder here, the whole revenue structure for our E911 funds changed this time last year. Before, the funds came directly to the city of Roswell, but with the creation of the new 911 authority at the state level, the Georgia Department of Revenue now collects those funds on our behalf and they remit those to us on a monthly basis. Our landline fee for E911 still remains the same at $1.50, but through this reorganization that occurred, our prepaid fee did increase, double from 75 cents to $1.50. So we did see some positive revenue impact from that. Another assumption that we made here in conjunction and working with the police department was forecasting additional communication officer positions in both FY 2022 and 2023. One item that's not here that we did discuss during the budget process was the need for the potential need for a new CAD system. Currently, that's in our CIP for FY 2022, and that is not included here, mainly because there's just not enough funding to cover that new system, and there's some flexibility there in our discussions with the PD about when that new system would actually be needed. But that would most likely need to be a general fund expense when that time came. So a little bit different picture here with our E911 fund. As you might remember in the budget process last year, we did anticipate that FY20 would probably be the last year that we would be able to fund our E911 services solely on E911 revenues. Based on our current estimate and our current projections for next year, there is possibility that we would be able to fund another year through solely on our E911 funds. However, as I know Melissa would be glad to tell you, that it's very common across the state and the country for the general fund of local governments to have to supplement E911 funds, and we're pretty fortunate that we've been able to sustain this as long as we have. So as you can see, we're expecting minimal growth in our revenues over the forecasted period. The increase in expenditures that you do see, again, related to inflation, employee compensation, and those new positions that were anticipated here in FY22 and 23. So as you can see, 2021, we are in the positive, but moving beyond that, all things staying as they are, the E911 fund would need to be supplemented somehow to cover all those expenses. And then the last fund we wanted to discuss was our Floss fund. So this is the 3/4 of a penny sales tax that began in April of 2017. It's levied in Fulton County outside of the Atlanta city limits. Of that total amount that's collected by the Department of Revenue, we receive 16.34% of that. Generally, the trend we're seeing is, and this has only been in effect for a couple of years, we saw about a little over 5% growth from FY18 to FY19. We're looking at around 3% forecasted growth in FY20. So this graph shows you our T-SPLOS fund forecast. The green line represents our estimated ending fund balance. You can see as of FY20, we anticipate to have a fund balance close to $40 million, primarily because we've been collecting the sales tax over the last couple of years, while those projects are just now beginning to ramp up. So as you can see, the revenue, the blue line, this T-SPLOS tax is scheduled to end in March of 2022. So that's why you see in FY22, that's the last year that you see a major revenue coming in for that fund. But then our expenditures will continue really beyond FY25 all the way to FY 2027, as we'll be making payments for the Holcomb Bridge Road interchange to the Georgia Department of Transportation. So those are all the funds that we included in our forecast, and I'll turn it back over to Harpreet to talk about our budget calendar.
So some of the major dates that we have during the FY 2021 budget process. So you have the next work session will be on the 24th. And at that work session, we will be discussing our revenues and fees and the personnel and benefits. On March 9th, we will have our third budget work session where we will discuss our capital projects, and that will be presented by our financial advisor. And then on the 23rd, we will have the partner organizations come in to present their respective budget requests. On May 11th is when we will present the proposed budget to Mayor and Council. And then on May 12th, we will have a public hearing for the millage rate at 6 p.m. And we will have our first budget reading on May the 26th. The department budget presentations will be sometime during May, but that date has not been finalized yet. We will have that for you as soon as it is finalized. And then we have the second budget reading on June 8th, and then our budget will start on July 1 of 2020. So those are some of our major needs. We are open for questions. Any questions?
Well, I'd like to thank you all again because you do a wonderful job and you leave very few questions on the table. So thank you so much. Does council have any questions? Councilmember Tyson?
Yeah, just again, let me echo that. You always do such a great job with this. Page, I'm not sure which, it might be your page 14. General fund revenues versus operating expenses. When I look at, so the 2020 estimate is coming up significantly higher in revenue. Can you just give me an idea what's driving that? Because that then is the basis for the out years.
So the main reason for that increase in revenue, so we are expecting our sales tax revenue to come in higher than what we had budgeted by about $1 million. And then we also have, the property tax revenues have also come in a little over $1 million. And then we have the insurance premium tax revenue that has come in close to $300,000 more than what we budgeted. So those are the major ones, and then we have other small increases in revenues in some of the other categories as well.
And then expenses are showing down $1 million.
Yes.
So that's primarily based on what we see today. When we look at it's primarily vacancy savings. So we're budgeting a certain amount for the full-time authorized positions, but looking at where we are today, we're going to see some vacancy savings there.
Thank you. And then just one more question. Your healthcare increases, how comfortable are you with those? And then if you can, and if you don't have it today, that's fine. What's an additional 1%? So if it wasn't, whatever it is, 5%, what's the difference between 5 and 6%? Those numbers seemed a little bit light for healthcare increases. And
So what we've done with those healthcare costs is we've taken an average, we've taken a rolling average over the last 5 years of what the actual expenses have been. And that's how we came up with the numbers that we have in the forecast of, I think it's around 5.4% or 5.8% for 2021, and then about 4%, hovering around 4 and 5% in the outer years. So it's a rolling average of 5 years. That's how we've done that.
thank you.
Councilmember Hall?
Yes, I just have a couple of questions. On the solid waste fund, you had mentioned that they're going to finance part of that transfer station. And that financing, where is that serviced, or how does that appear in the budget, the loan?
So if you will, there is another packet that we gave you that has the details. Yes, so in there, if you go to, I don't know what page number it is. I think it is page number 5. So you will see the detailed breakdown in there. And so of the 3.1 million, so you see the debt service line,
Yes.
so the financing portion, that's included in there.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more question on the Hotel Motel Fund. We have the the portion that goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Um, For that portion, how does the city work with that? Do we have a budget, or is there a budget that we're also working with on them, that we're a partnership with them? Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
So, yeah, I mean, we are required by the state to devote those revenues to whoever serves as our destination marketing organization, which would be the Roswell CVB in this case. So they submit their request during the budget year, during the budget process. In previous years, because our revenues for hotel motel have been fairly stagnant because of the number of hotels that we have, it's been past practice that they've actually been funded a little bit more than what those TCT revenues were. So that's how it's kind of worked in the past. Fortunately, with the new hotels coming online, that might change.
So they present a budget to,
They do. They'll be here with the day that we have the partner organizations.
Okay.
They'll be here to give you their goals and objectives for the next year.
Additional questions from, yes, council members opposed.
So about the calendar, where will be the session for when all the department will come and present one by one?
So
They will be that,
that hasn't been finalized yet.
okay?
Yeah, we're still working on
Will they
which
come
day
and
we can
present in
have that.
detail?
Yes, but we
Everything.
will have that.
Okay, it's not
It'll be sometime in May.
something, okay. Thank you.
And I've requested that staff get that to us as soon as possible, so we can plan.
Thank you.
Additional questions from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? Seeing no hands up, unless anybody has any second thoughts, I would like to thank you again for a great presentation, the great job you're doing. You guys are awesome, and this meeting's adjourned.